ओके, नमस्कार। बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद आपका। आप समय निकाल के आए, डॉक्टर पंकज जैन। This is a very special lecture, and this is a series of lectures that now we are going to organize. We have had one lecture by Professor Shashibala some time ago on China-India cultural relations. And she is also going to give us some more talks in due course. And I'm very glad to welcome Dr. Pankaj Jain, who is presently Associate Professor at the Department of Anthropology in University of North Texas. And he's from Rajasthan. And he studied here, I think, computer science. And then he went and changed his discipline. And today he is going to talk about dharma and ecology. His teaching interests include religion and ecology, Asian diaspora, and sustainability of religious communities in Americas. He has been interested in connecting ancient practices with contemporary issues. I think that's a very, very important work that he is doing. And he's now exploring the connections between religious traditions and sustainability in the US and in India. And he has helped 2 temples in Dallas area to get grants from their energy company to help them make more sustainable and energy efficient, probably in addition to the profit that they will be making. He is a research affiliate with Harvard University's Pluralism Project, a scholar in residence with Green Faith, a board member of Society for Hindu-Christian Studies, the India representative for the International Society for Environmental Ethics, and a consultant at the University of North Texas's Sustainable Communities Initiative, and an advisory board of the Executive Advisory Council of Hindu American Seva Communities, an NGO working with the White House Office for Faith-Based Initiatives. He is the co-founder of the American Academy of India Studies. Before doing an MA from Columbia University and a PhD from Iowa, as I said, he had a BS in computer science from India and worked as a software engineer in India and New Jersey. So he's had a very interesting career. Now, why this talk in the VIF? I think, firstly, the Vivekananda International Foundation, of course, it's in some sense a normal think tank focusing on strategic affairs, foreign policy, international relations, and so on. So we do a lot of these issues, work on defense issues and such issues. But over the years, we have felt, and Colonel Gautam is here, that see, unless we understand our history, cultural and civilization and its values, and also philosophy, Professor Bhatt is here, we will not be able to impart that originality in our thinking. So what has happened is that there are a very dominant Western discourse on international relations. On one count, I believe there are about 80 or 90 international relations theories which try to explain the conflict, war, peace, etc. In fact, many of them are actually creating conflict and war and then trying to resolve it. Now, there is an apparent dissatisfaction with the inadequacies of these theories. And if you look at in depth, you realize that the dominant international relations theories are essentially based on the base nature of the human nature. There is something evil, and there's something human nature is evil, and all these theories are based. So they have this idea of the whole world is in anarchy, the whole world is basically conflict, and then we talk about profit, etc., which is profit is another name for competition. So the idea of cooperation, idea of living together, these ideas or sustainability for that matter. These ideas are only secondary in nature in the international relations theories. The basic discourse is that of conflict, cooperation, bloodshed, etc., and how to, of course, we should prevent it. So some other theory comes up. On the other hand, if you look at the Indian culture, where they say that every living being or non-living being, they're all connected with each other, and there is that परमात्मा का अंश आप में है. So अपने में और परमात्मा के बीच में कोई difference है नहीं. So if you take that framework and base your thinking and theories on that framework, then you will have a very different view of the world. That doesn't mean that wars are not there. I mean, Mahabharata and Ramayana, etc., they're all full of war, violence, bloodshed, etc. But the essential framework is the unity between nature and the human beings, amongst the human beings. And of course, rising above all this materialism and going for much higher aims, etc. Now, that kind of a thing is very foreign to these dominant theories that we have. So, coming back to our, the international relations and these the theories of development or theories of cooperation or war and peace. Now, how do we reflect some of these ideas that have been developed in Eastern cultures, Hinduism, Buddhism? How do we bring those essential philosophy that is there into our modern discourse? So that is something that we would like to understand. It may not be easy. It may take long time because we don't have enough depth also in this country, because we are not teaching these things. It's not being taught in schools. There is also, this artificially we have divided, this discourse of secularism also, I think, has done a tremendous harm to our thinking, because it's a very narrow thing that we took. It has that unity and a sense of holistic nature or harmony, as Vivekananda says, seeking harmony and diversity. All that is very easy. It's not easy to take that and bring it straight away, but I think we should try and understand. So the importance of philosophy, history, culture, civilization, that becomes very important. So part of our work in the VIF, nascent, but is directed towards that. And Arpita, who is joined us some months ago, she is now kind of anchoring our effort, and she has invited Dr. Pankaj Jain here. And Professor S.R. Bhatt, I had the occasion to meet him just a few weeks ago in Tokyo for one conference we had gone on Hindu-Buddhist dialogue. And he gave us, and in his lecture there, talked about democracy. And he's the chairman of the Indian Philosophical, what is it? Indian Council of Philosophical Research. And they do lots of workshops, hundreds of workshops on this area. But I think the catchment area seems to be still very narrow. So whether we can work together and have some joint workshops. But all these ideas we should discuss in simple terms, and which are understandable, and people feel, ye sirf kuch hame mil sakta hai. So we'll try and develop some of these ideas in our own. It's really the interface of hardcore philosophy, strategy, etc., with philosophy, history, culture, that we should do it. Colonel Gautam has done a lot of work on Arthashastra and written a number of books, and so I'm very happy that you are here, and my other colleagues are also here. So that's a somewhat longish introduction, but I thought we must put your talk in the context in which we are working. So now I turn to Dr. Pankaj Jain, who will speak on, I think the exact title is Dharma and Ecology? No, Dharma and Ecology. So give us some ideas, and you can take some time, maybe 45 minutes or so, and then we can have some discussions and question and answers. Yeah, so over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Gupta. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Mitra, Dr. Gupta, for inviting me, hosting me. I've been I was born in Rajasthan, did my computer science engineering, and then I went to US, and then changed my career and got PhD and so on. And I'm right now at UNT. When I was doing my PhD, uh, my friends are here from those days, so I'm a little bit nervous. Also, Professor Anup Kumar now also in Ohio. Yes, and Professor Chetan in right now in Ohio. But we were together at University of Iowa, and Professor Chetan Sarvakatosh also. So very happy to see my old friends our Adda. Okay. Uh, yeah. So when I was doing my PhD, I was kind of new to humanities and social sciences, and so I was looking for something, a topic for my research that can really make the ancient texts and ancient philosophies relevant for contemporary issues. So I took a course on environmental ethics and religion, and in that I was somewhat surprised to see some of the things that other scholars have mentioned that I'll share in a second. But in that course, I heard first time a reference to the Bishnoi community, and I was pleasantly surprised that Bishnoi community, they are in Rajasthan, and I'm from Rajasthan. When I was growing up in Rajasthan, I had barely heard about that community. So I thought of choosing that community for my research, in which I can connect culture and ecology, because they are still known. They were still known back in, I think, even back in 70s and 80s for their environmental work. But in-depth study of the Bishnoi community has not yet been done, especially in English and especially in America. So that became my topic. And another community is the Swadhyay movement that I'll share in a second, and then the Bhil community of Rajasthan, Gujarat, MP. So these are the three communities that I chose for my PhD research. And then that became my first book that is just released in India now also, Dharma Ecology of Hindu Communities. I have a couple of books also if anybody wants to buy after the talk. And so that was my first book, came in 2011 in US and came in 2017 in India. My second book was on Uttarakhand's cultural aspects and scientific research and socio-religious movement that was led by HESCO, another NGO in Uttarakhand. But today I'm going to speak mostly from my first book. So next slide. Okay, so in my talk, I'm going to share some of the things that how one of the American scholars, how they are connecting Vedanta with environmental problems in India. And then I'll share how what they're missing in their interpretation of Vedanta and Shankara. And then my own research from the two communities of Swadhyaya and Bishnoi, and then some more aspects on the Dharmic philosophy and ecology, and then Jain Dharma and ecology. These are some of the points I'll be touching. So Lance Nelson, standing right there behind Buddha, he's one of the senior professors in one of the universities in California. He wrote an article, he published an article in which he claimed, or he questioned the Mahavakyas such as Brahm, Satyam, Jagan, Mithya, that maybe that is the reason that Indians don't care about their environmental degradation, because Jagat is Mithya anyway. So if rivers are being abused or forests are being destroyed, Indians don't care because that's all Mithya, that's all illusion anyway, as pointed by Nelson. So I think what they're missing, what he misses, or what the way they understand Vedanta, and one of the biggest propounder of Vedanta, Adi Shankara, itself is a problem. It's an issue, I think, in my opinion. So the way they study Vedanta and Shankara, the propounder of Vedanta, as somebody who was, intellectual giant, he founded Advaita Vedanta, he started the ascetic order and great commentaries he wrote and so on. So kind of a crypto-Buddhist or Prachana Bauddha. But he was not somebody who actually walked across India and established the four mathas or revived the ancient Sanatana Dharma and so on. So those are all things that they do not connect with Shankara. So I think, in my opinion, the way they teach or practice philosophy is mostly focusing only on intellectual aspects of philosophy, not philosophy as a living tradition. So that's what I think in their own image they're projecting on Shankara also, which is different from, I think, the way Shankara is understood by most Indians. So for Indians, I think Shankara is captured in hagiographical details written in Shankar Digvijay and other texts, where he is seen as, or he's portrayed as, he's regarded as a great Hindu revivalist. He intellectually defeats in Shastra the Buddhist traditions, and he actually walks across India and establishes these four mathas and so on. So the propounder of Vedanta himself is not somebody who ignored, not somebody who ignored his worldly duties or even social aspects of the culture. He walked and worked towards reviving the Sanatan Dharma. He wrote Bhakti hymns also. So in him, most Indians would see a combination of Gyan, Karma, and Bhakti, all three. So he inspires devotion. He is a symbolic role model for even for social or religious spiritual activism. And so he inspires world affirmation, if anything, not nature devaluation, as argued by Lance Nelson. So Brahm Satyam Jagat Mithya is mentioned by Shankara, but not. I think out of thousands of lines that he wrote, probably just 4 or 5 times he actually writes this line. And even there, I think the way he's describing this line, or there is even a legend, as everybody knows here, that an elephant is running after Shankara, and somebody asks him, if Jagat is mithya, why are you running from the elephant? So then Shankara responds that if elephant is mithya, my running is also mithya. So that kind of if elephant is mithya, then my running away is also mithya. So there are, I think, the two levels of reality that he or many other Vedantic philosophers would say, that conventional reality of Nama Rupa and transcendental reality. So yes, Jagat is mithya for somebody who is at transcendental reality level, but for conventional reality, for most people, it has to be accepted. Our duties have to be accepted, nature has to be accepted, and so on. So India's current ecological problems should not be blamed on statements like Brahm Satyam Jagat Mithya. So Advaita, if anything, is denouncing the attachment towards the worldly matters, not the world itself. It's against the duality of spirit and matter also, as propounded by statements such as Ishavasyam Idam Sarvam, that comes from Ishopnishad. So it's all about non-duality, where there is no duality, there is no Dvaita. It's all unbroken, undivided cosmic unity across the universe. So that is what, if that is the case, then Jagat cannot be mithya, because it is divine in its most fundamental level. But then Nelson goes on further, and in another volume that was published by Harvard University Press, edited by Chris Chappell and Mary Evelyn Tucker, and in that he blames Bhagavad Gita also for India's current environmental degradation. He's saying that because of Gita's message to be Sthita Pragya, maybe Indians are way too Sthita Pragya and they don't care about environmental issues. So I think he's again missing the point that Sthita Pragya message that is given by Krishna to Arjun is not to ignore the problems, but while solving the problem, be Sthita Pragya, be stoic, be stable-minded, and continue to perform your duties, even if you have to kill your own uncles and cousins and your teacher and great-grandfather and so on. That is to be done, but while performing the duty, be Sthita Pragya. So actor is that which is deconstructed, not the action itself. Action is not to be ignored. Being an actor has to be from correct perspective, as somebody who is simply a nimitta and not the doer himself. Second claim he makes, chapter 5, verse 19, is that Gita is asking to conquer the nature. So in that nature, Nelson is, I think, looking at Bhagavad Gita also probably from, Old Testament's perspective, in which there is a mention of dominion over nature. But the nature here, what is mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita, is not the outside nature. The conquering has to be done not on the outside nature, not on the trees or forests or water or animals, but the conquering that is to be done is on inside nature, on our own vikars and so on. So that is the point that he missed again, I guess. Third point that he makes in that chapter that he was included in that volume, in which he says that Krishna is inspiring Arjuna to worship him only, and through Krishna, Arjun can get moksha. So I think again he's looking at it from now New Testament's perspective, where Jesus is asking Christians to worship him and follow him and get the heaven. But Nelson again seems to miss the point that when Krishna is asking Arjun to worship him, to follow him, Krishna is not that cowherd boy of Mathura. Krishna is in his Vishwarup Darshan, his cosmic form, in which all the species, all the cosmic entities are included in Krishna. So Krishna is to be worshipped not at the expense, not at the cost of the nature, but nature is already part of Krishna. So that's, I just wanted to give you some glimpses of how some scholars have connected Vedanta and other philosophical texts. I'll take questions at the end of my talk, please. So these are the issues that I found in Nelson's writings, which I try to respond in my book. And so I just wanted to give you some glimpse before I launch my own talk. But before that, I want to give one more quote from an anthropologist, Professor Angold, who worked in Rajasthan also. Now, I think it's an interesting contrast. So for somebody like Nelson, who is a a philosophy professor, philosophy scholar, and somebody who's an anthropologist who actually goes into the villages of Rajasthan, a village called Ghatiyali, where she spent decades and decades. So what she learns from villagers is just so enlightening, and that I've put the entire quote there. Basically, she is saying that even villagers, so-called illiterate villagers in Rajasthan, they realize that the idea of God in Hindu tradition or Bharati tradition in general is not the idea of God that is mentioned in the Bible. So, God that the so called illiterate villagers are accepting or understanding is a natural law of cause and consequences, action and consequences, karma philosophy. That is how they see their life, that's how they try to live their life. So, it's not a God that is judging your actions from somebody somewhere sitting in the heaven. That's not the God that villagers are understanding. So, that's a very interesting quote there. Second quote that I put also from Anne Gold's work is that humans there again in that village of Ghatiyali, they understand the interconnection between humans and what is happening on the environment. So that interconnection that some people in America are still having trouble with in accepting that humans are responsible for climate change, for example. Those so-called illiterate villagers of Rajasthan, they totally understand. They totally accept that if trees are being cut in our village, that is because we are becoming morally corrupt. If we are becoming more greedy and angry, that reflects on our environment. That interconnection is so easily understood by those villagers. So the idea of God and idea of this interconnection is so different from what Nelson claimed and what Anne Gold found from her fieldwork in Rajasthan. So I thought I'll give you a glimpse of some Euro-American scholars and how the debates are going on. Then my own, then there are other scholars who have claimed, and not just ecology, but even they sometimes you might have heard that Indians lack the sense of history, Indians lack the sense of even religion per se, or so on. So similarly, other scholars have claimed that Indians have no sense of environmentalism. The scholars such as Emma Tollin published a book called Biodivinity and Biodiversity that came from Ashgate a few years back, in which she claims that Indians are just two empty stomach people and they don't have energy or money or even care to become environmentalists. So I wrote a scathing review of that book. But to correct that perspective, I guess, or to respond to that perspective from somebody like Emma Tollin, I found this interesting quote that Indian texts may not have the exact word for environmentalism or climate change or global warming, but Indian cultural forms, or not just Indian, even I think African or any indigenous cultural patterns in terms of art or culture or music, even we can find these ideas which can probably called as proto-environmentalist ideas that are definitely found in Indian traditions also. So that is what we saw some glimpses even in the Chipko movement back in 1970s when led by Gaura Devi and Sundarlal Bahuguna, Chandri Prasad Bhatt, we see it cannot be called purely a spiritual movement, but it definitely had some glimpses where ladies tied rakhis or sacred threads on trees and they chanted some Vaishnavite text and so on, Bhagavad Puran and so on. So some people had speculated that the inspiration for the Chipko people to actually literally hug the trees probably came from the Bishnoi people who also had done the similar thing a few centuries ago. So that's what I also show in my research. And then so that's what I'm going to show you in my next slide. And then the second community, that Swadhyay's Prayogs, led by Athavale in 1940. So these are the two communities, Bishnoi and Swadhyay. Bishnoic word, there is another misconception that Bishnoi word came out of 20 and 9. Bish is 20, Noi is 9. But that's a misconception. Even I was guilty of that. When I published my dissertation, I probably wrote the same thing, but I've been corrected by my fellow Bishnoi friends. That Bishnoi is actually just a replacement for Vishnoi. Vishnoi means those who worship Vishnu. So Vishnu in his Nirgun Nirakar form, because when Guru Jambeshwar was born, if you notice the dates there, 15th century, early 16th century. He was almost contemporary of Guru Nanak and Kabir and several other Bhakti movement saints in India at that time. So he also emphasized the Nirgun Nirakar form of Vishnu, and he can be seen as part of that, India-wide Bhakti Andolan that was going on in during that time. So Bishnoi community was founded in 1490s, roughly speaking. Swadhyay movement, roughly speaking, 1940s is the time when that movement started. This is the map this is a map of the Bishnoi people, mostly focused in Rajasthan, but also in UP and MP, Odisha, even a little bit, and Haryana and Punjab, of course. So this map is very interesting. Can you guess? It didn't. This map did not come from Government of India. It did not come from Anthropological Survey of India. It did not come from Rajasthan government. I did not fake this map. This came from a project called the Joshua Project. That's a missionary movement in America that is targeting several castes, jatis, and tribes, communities across India. And so they made this map, and I think it served my purpose. So I used it in my dissertation also. So according to this map, which is I think fairly accurate, it's about 500,000 people in Rajasthan and other parts of India, and now outside India as well. Uh, so as was the case back even when I was growing up in Rajasthan, the drought and famine was very common in Rajasthan. So back in 1485, this also happened for 5-6 years. There was not a single drop of water. Animals were dying. People were crying for water and so on. And in that scenario, Guru Jambeshwar had this enlightenment experience at Samrathal, where he sat for meditation for several days. And as he came out of that mystical experience, enlightenment or dhyan, at the end of the culmination of the dhyana experience, his teachings from that experience were codified into 29 rules. That became the foundation for Bishnoi Dharma or Bishnoi Dharma. And other teachings were also captured in 120 sabdas in Rajasthani language, in that archaic Rajasthani language. Now, what is interesting, especially, it was really interesting to me at least, that the way he uses the word dharam in Rajasthani language, not just for spirituality, which is of course common. Dharam is for chanting Vishnu. That's what he also preached, that if you want to become Vishnu, if you want to become my follower, chant the name of Vishnu and you can become a Vishnui. Or you can, usual morality codes such as do not lie, do not steal, do not kill. So personal and social morality. So last 2 points are very common across several spiritual gurus, not just in India, but I think across the world. But the first 2 points are, I think, really interesting, in which he says, very specifically, he says, do not cut green trees. If you want to become Vishnu, if you want to join my order of Vishnoi Dharam or Vishnoi community, you need to stop cutting green trees. You need to stop eating meat. You need to become vegetarian, of course, without using those words in Rajasthani language he spoke. Second point he says, is that you need to practice personal hygiene and sanitation. So imagine, again, in the desert where water is so precious, and yet he says that every Vishnu must take bath every day in the morning. Every day you must take bath. So even I think even in Europe in those times, that daily practice of bath was not common. But here in that desert region, that Guru is preaching about Swachh Bharat mission in a way, right? So Swachh Bharat is not new for Vishnoi people. So these are the 4 points. But I think interesting thing again is that the word dharam, without using Sanskrit language, without quoting any Shankara or Brahma Sutra or Upanishad, he's using the word dharam for all these 4 aspects of his teachings, which is what I'll explain in a second more. So how the word dharam was used by Vishnu. Now, again, he was not a Vedantic scholar per se, but what he teaches is, I think, comes pretty close to Vedantic idea of seeing divinity even in the animals. So he criticizes both Hindu and Muslims, like the case of Kabir. He also criticizes Muslims, those who are doing animal sacrifices and so on. So he really exhorts them to stop animal sacrifices and try to see divinity even in the animals. That is what we see, again, the glimpses of Vedanta philosophy, even in this ancient Rajasthani speaking guru called Guru Jambeshwar. Now, speaking and teaching is one thing, but what you do in life makes, I think, more impact. So he taught all those things, he said all those things, but he did these things also. So there are these legends and so on in hagiographical details, in folk songs of Rajasthan, that he, by miracle, he sometimes created these water harvesting sites. He planted trees, in thousands of trees he planted overnight, sometimes by miracle. He also created these gaushalas and bird feed sites and for animals and birds. So he taught he preached and he practiced. So what impact he made was this. So after a couple of centuries, this is the most famous legend coming from the Vishnoi community, that back in 1730, this probably can be seen as world's first environmental sacrifice, in which Amrita Devi, a Vishnoi woman, she literally rushes to a spot where Khejri tree of Rajasthan was being cut by soldiers of Jodhpur, and she rushes to the spot. She literally hugs the tree and she gets killed. So the Chipko, what happened in 1970s in Uttarakhand, was already being done by Amrita Devi. And with Amrita Devi, total 363 men, women, and children of Bishnoi community were all killed as they literally hugged the khejuri tree. So that trail of Amrita Devi is now even popular in America, where on Amazon.com I found this book which celebrates the life and that event of Amrita Devi, and probably with the wrong tree. Khejri tree does not look like this. This is like a banyan tree probably, but that's what is now even in America as a children's book. Uh, but what happened in 1730 is not just, again, not an isolated incident. We all know now the Salman Khan's case. He was in the news again just a couple of days back, that even today he cannot leave the country without taking permission from Jodhpur judge, because what he did back in 90s, where he, while shooting the film Hum Saath Saath Hain, he went out to this leisure trip and tries to kill a deer, and then he's still facing the consequences. Oh, one point I forgot to make is that this event that happened in 1730, there is no written record, but it is very well captured in folk songs and folk tales in Rajasthan. So, most of our history, not just in India, I think even Africa, Japan, it's all oral history, and folk songs and folk legends have made sure that this memory is very fresh in the minds of Bishnoi community at least. So that's Amrita Devi, then Salman Khan's case. Then this middle picture is of a grandfather, a very old man of Bishnoi community, and he's very proudly sharing his with a documentary filmmaker called Willing to Sacrifice. A film was made on Bishnoi people a few years back, in which he is saying that my son has just lost his life because he was also trying to save a deer from a poacher. So it's very common for Bishnoi people even today that they are at the forefront of saving flora and fauna of Rajasthan. That's why Indian government, when they started a new award, the India's Environmental Ministry, the award is named after Amrita Devi, that first person in the world who was killed while saving a tree. And so award is honoring the Bishnoi woman, and the award is given mostly to Bishnoi people because they are at the forefront of saving the flora and fauna of Rajasthan and elsewhere. Then that's a Bishnoi woman, also award-winning picture where she is nurturing her own child and a deer cub. So that's all some glimpses of Bishnoi community I shared with you. Now some glimpses of the Swadhyay community. The Swadhyay movement started mostly from Mumbai, but also in Gujarat. Now, unlike the Bishnoi people or unlike the Khatyali villagers, Swadhyay founder and preacher was a Sanskrit scholar, Vedantic scholar. He started giving pravachans, discourses back in 1942 in Mumbai. And what he taught was, again, very similar to Vedantic idea of indwelling God, that divinity is not just in the heavens or in the temples or churches or mosques, but divinity is in every heart, every particle of the universe. So that's what he taught. But again, teaching is one thing and doing is another thing. So what he did and what his followers did is, that's another quote again, which is again celebrating the reverence or divinity across the universe. That's the quote from Artavle's, one of the discourses that I translated. And then what they did is this, that saying is one thing, that Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam or Aham Brahmasmi or Tattvamasi or so on, but how do we practice those ideas? To practice those ideas, Artavle and his followers, they actually went out to villages in Gujarat and Maharashtra and elsewhere in India and even outside India. And these, what they called as Bhav Feri, Bhakti Feri, and so on, these Bhakti Feris were used to establish the selfless relationships with the villages across Gujarat, Maharashtra, and elsewhere parts of India, to try to establish this spiritual family in which relationships are not based on any selfish gains, but totally on selfless motives, totally on spiritual aspects. So those visits led to the Amritalayam, the second point, which is the socio-spiritual shrines, in which village pujari is not from a single caste or single jati, but from anybody in the village can become a pujari, and turnwise the entire village comes together and they offer their income to that temple, and the entire village gets benefit out of that temple. Similarly, the fisher folk of Gujarat and Maharashtra who earn their living from fishing, so obviously they cannot stop their traditional profession, but if ocean is divine, then the coastal areas need to be kept clean also. So as part of ocean worship, cleaning efforts were started across the coastal areas of Gujarat and Maharashtra and elsewhere. Then dairy industry, in which cattle was better taken care of. New tree temples. There are kind of new sacred groves that were constructed by Swadhyay people. and in which again the whatever fruits grow from those sacred groves or vriksha mandirs, that's not they do not belong to one person, but they belong to entire village, and the income that comes out of those tree temples, vriksha mandirs, is shared not as a charity but as a prasad with the needy people of that village. And similarly, farming and then rainwater harvesting also. Nice, catchy slogans were given by Athavale to his followers that Prakriti is not just for upyog or upabhog, but Prakriti is for upasana. वृक्ष में वासुदेव को देखना है या पौधे में प्रभु को देखना है. Nice catchy words that he used. In Gujarati language, chhod means a tree. So छोड़ में रणछोड़ को देखना है. रणछोड़ दास की जय, जो कृष्ण जो को बोलते हैं वहाँ पे गुजरात में. तो छोड़ में रणछोड़, इस तरह से. So with these ideas, they constructed 25 tree temples across Gujarat. 1 crore plants were planted across Gujarat. And then cattle projects were also done by, and still being done by Swadhyay people across Gujarat and Maharashtra. So they did all these things. If you notice that, so coastal areas are being cleaned, cattle are being taken care of, sacred groves are being constructed, farming is done with this idea, rainwater harvesting is done. So all of these projects connect with environment in one way or the other. So in my research, when I asked them, are you doing these things for environmental reasons? They disagreed with my question. They rejected my question and said that we are not environmentalists. We don't have to, we are not doing for climate change or biodiversity or those things. We are simply expressing our devotion. We are doing these for devotional reasons. Any benefit for the environment is simply a byproduct. Their favorite word is byproduct. We are those, on that similar vein, they say that we work for so-called untouchables, but we are not Achuto Dharak. That is simply a byproduct. We work for women, but we are not Mahila Udharak. That is simply a byproduct. We simply express our dharma. We simply practice our devotion towards the divinity, and any byproduct for social upliftment or environmental improvement is simply a byproduct. And that's a picture of current leader, daughter of Athavale. So in rainwater harvesting, they did is 1.25 lakh wells were recharged across Gujarat and Maharashtra, and more than 1,000 ponds were harvested for rainwater. And again, the catchy slogan given was, अगर आप पृथ्वी माता की प्यास बुझाएंगे तभी माता आपकी प्यास बुझाएगी. तो आपको you have to take care and save every single water of rain that comes to Gujarat and Maharashtra. So this is, I think, even interesting from another perspective also, that we all know that what happened in the British Raj when, and then after British Raj, in Nehru Raj also, that the big dams were celebrated as big temples and so on, but we ignored our own local, smaller scale water resources. So Swadhyayis and Vishnois have been doing these for 5 centuries now. They have been harvesting the rainwater without using the word rainwater harvesting. So that is, I think, our traditional water solution that we see in cities like Bhopal and Udaipur, where their local kings had constructed these lakes and they also did rainwater harvesting and so on. So same thing was revived by Swadhyay people in 1980s and 90s in Gujarat, Maharashtra, and elsewhere. Another interesting aspect he gave was that yes, there is Kesha Karshan, capillary action, because of which water rises in the plants against gravitation. But with Kesha Karshan, you should also accept Keshava Karshan, which means, Krishna's force that makes the water rise and the entire plant becomes green. So there are different kinds of these devotional volunteers who go to these farms. Those who are fully retired, those who are householders can go as part-time priests or part-time pujaris, and then again produce that comes out of these farms is distributed as prasad, not as a charity. Okay, then that's another interesting quote that I got, that if you go just simply for farming, you're a farmer. If you go with devotional aspect, you can make the entire world green with devotion. That's a picture from New Jersey, where Swadhyayis are doing similar things in New Jersey also, in America also, where they get this plant and sing these bhajans with the plant. So plant essentially becomes a family member, and similar things are done for tree plantation even there. Just a brief timeline: first tree temple, then Wasteland Award, then they get this Nobel Prize of Asia, also called as, right, and then Templeton Prize, Padma Vibhushan, and 24th tree temple, and the work goes on. So that's a way, what we see in Bishnoi Guru Jambeshwar's, those 4 points. If you remember, the word dharam was used for those 4 things. A similar ethnographic work was done by Waitman and Pandey back in 1978, in which very obviously, it's all very obvious to us at least, but what they found is that dharma word is used by Indians for religion, for physical properties, and for duty. So religious aspects, spiritual aspects, environmental aspects and moral aspects are all covered by the word dharma. That is exactly what we see in the works such as Bishnoi's, Swadhyay's, and even in this field work that was done by Waitman and Pandey. So for Swadhyay's and Bishnoi's, I think what they've done is they've taken inspiration or from the virtues of trees and nature in general, applied them to become better human being. So environmentalism happens as a byproduct, not as a consciously they don't have to become environmentalists. Simply by practicing dharma, inspired by nature, takes care of the environment as a byproduct. Then some more ideas now, mostly from our texts that we see in communities such as Bishnois and Swadhyayas and so on, that Panch Mahabhutas, that idea of our senses are in harmony with the outside Panch Mahabhutas. The divinity is present in every particle of the universe because of Ishava Samidam Sarvam. Then dharma as duty and virtue, as we already saw. Karma also can be seen as environmental law, because if we dump a river, for example, that water comes back to us. We have to, we will be forced to drink that polluted water, if not now, in future. So the law of action and consequences can be applied as an environmental law. So the idea of dharma and karma, idea of tantra and yoga, in which personal energy should be in harmony with the cosmic energy. Yoga prerequisite, as you know, is ahimsa. Ahimsa can be practiced by cutting down or reducing the consumption of meat, which has been proven that one of the top 3 reasons for climate change is meat consumption. That was already criticized or critiqued by our ancient people coming from Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, all 3. Sannyasa also can be seen as an environmental rule, because sannyasa means to cut down one's needs, so to reduce one's carbon footprint. Sannyasa is a good example, good theory coming from Dharma Ecology. So some more ideas such as avatara. Also, we see that Vishnu, to come down as avatara, only human is not being a human being is not the monopoly of for the avatara. Even as a tortoise or a fish or a half man, half lion or a boar, also we see the divinity. So the equality of species we see even in the ideas such as avatara and other ideas. So Dharma ecology can also be compared with Gaia hypothesis that is now being projected by ecofeminists in the West, that Gaia is a Mother Earth is now being reinterpreted as Gaia, which comes pretty close to the Indian idea of seeing Mother Earth. Reverence for life is by a Christian theologian also, which means that reverence should be for entire creation. Land ethic idea comes from Aldo Leopold, an American environmental philosopher, which also celebrates the idea of land to be respected. Now, as a reality check, we all know that environmental problems are huge in India. We cannot just shun them away. But all those issues that we see in India are mostly the issues of pollution and maybe overpopulation and so on. But other aspect that we often don't see in the media is this, that came from an American magazine, National Geographic magazine, that did a survey in 2008, 9, 10, 12, and 14. And every time they found that India's carbon footprint is less than China, Brazil, United States, and European nations, and even Australia and so on. Why is India's carbon footprint even less than Brazil and China? They found those 4 parameters in which they saw that that Indian housing needs are still at a very minimal level, where 24/7 hot water or central air conditioning is still not being found in Indian houses. Still 2-3 generations live together under a single roof. Our transportation needs are still at a very decent level. Public transport or public transport, carpooling, biking, walking is still practiced by many Indians. Food is still mostly vegetarian. We know that not all Indians are vegetarians, but for the most part, I think rice, dal, and gehu, I think covers Indian food habits pretty well across India, east, west, north, south. Yes, people do take fish and meat and so on, but they can survive, and they do survive happily for even on rice, dal, and gehu for the most part. Meat is, for many communities, meat is simply a occasional delicacy, not a requirement like in America, where 3 times a day meat is required for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, which causes huge carbon footprint in America. Consumer goods are also at a minimum level. Microwave or dishwasher is still not yet found in many Indian homes, where in contrast to America or other Euro-American nations. So all of these factors combined as concluded by the National Geographic survey, that keeps India's carbon footprint still less than China or even less than Brazil. So that's an interesting aspect, I think, that comes from our cultural habits such as joint family or vegetarianism and so on. Then the idea from Jain philosophy also we can take a look. I think I'm out of time also. I'll probably just show you this slide, and I'll conclude my talk with the idea of Gandhi and how his life can be seen as an environmental statement, and many of his practices we see in which he really had his needs very low. He practiced nonviolence, compassion for animals, and so on. That's where I think I'll conclude my